Hello again, and welcome to One Accord Fellowship Church. The study we've been sharing begins in the book of Proverbs, where the book says that if we want wisdom, it begins with knowledge, understanding something, but then obeying that knowledge that we gain, and it becomes wisdom. Well, it matters what knowledge you have, doesn't it? Because some people know a lot of things and they put them into practice and wind up in the penitentiary. That's not very wise. So where do we get our wisdom? Well, the book of Proverbs, like the Bible, acts as a guide in our journey of life. And we've been talking about that journey. And that journey, if it's going to be an eternal journey, begins with the salvation of an individual. And what do I mean by salvation? Well, Jesus, you see, came to teach us about this new agreement that God had with humanity as opposed to the old agreement. And that new agreement, Jesus was right at the center of it. In fact, he is the complete center, the complete pact. And it's through Jesus that we find this salvation that God talks about. Salvation into heaven and not to hell. And last week we talked about how Jesus said that he was the gate, and whoever entered through that gate would be saved. But I want us to explore that a little bit more. We said we would. I'd like for us to do that. But prior to doing that, let's look at our own lives. What's your life like? If you were to describe it in, say, 20 words, what would it be? I would venture to say that most people are going to say, well, it's pretty good. Well, pretty good means that there must be some pretty bad, because it's not completely good. And most people, I think, would describe it pretty good, okay, all right, I feel good about it. Why is there any, all of those seems, they seem to have a little hesitancy about life. Some people will say great, but when you start asking questions, you discover that great is pretty qualified. Because at the end of the day, we all deal with discouragement. We all deal with a lot of stresses. We all deal with people that hurt us. We have not just emotional hurts, but we have physical hurt. We have pains and we have aches and we have worries and we have disappointments and we have all these horrible things that happen in life. And when you filter all of that into it, then life is sometimes real tough. And that's just here on earth. This is what makes this Jesus calling himself the gate very interesting. Not only interesting, but magnificent. And not only helpful, but meaningful. And not only meaningful, but real. You see, Jesus, in this 10th chapter of the book of John, he's going to call himself the gate. And all who enter through that gate, he says, will be saved. Now, in what context? Well, earlier we read in Matthew, where Jesus said that he tells us to enter through a narrow gate. This is out of the book of Matthew, 7th chapter. He says, enter by the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction. And there are many who go in it. Because narrow is the gate and difficult is the way which leads to life, and there are few who find it. That's the context. Christ himself is saying in Matthew 7, verses 13 and 14, he's saying, look, there's two gates. I am one of those gates, but it's pretty narrow. And here we get a picture of it here in chapter 10 of the book of John. we begin with verse 7, and it says, Then Jesus said to them again, and we'll talk about who the them was in a minute. Most assuredly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. I am the door of the sheep. All who ever came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep do not hear them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. Now that's a mouthful, and I mean such a blessing. We were talking about disappointments in life. We were talking about sometimes our lives are not that great. So how is it that we find a better life? An eternal life even. A better life as pilgrims here on earth, and then moving on to our home, eternal home in heaven. How is it that we do that? Well, Jesus answers that. He said there, Jesus said to them again, most assuredly I say to you, what does he say? I am the door of the sheep. And he says, if you enter through that door, you'll be saved. Now, to better understand that, keep in mind that he was talking to Pharisees and scribes and others that were listening at the time, and they would have understood completely when he says, I'm the door. You see, in ancient Israel, I say ancient, Middle East basically, back when Jesus, some 2,000 years ago, when they talked about sheep and folds, and they talk about pens and where they kept the sheep, they understood. Those sheepfolds, if you will, those pens, were not like ranchers nowadays that have these huge gates and fences. Theirs was maybe a fenced-in area that was maybe made out of bushes and brush and whatnot. And the gate itself, this is what was interesting. The shepherd would be the gate. Into what? Into that fold, into that pen. And many of the shepherds had not very large flocks. The flocks were not very big then. And so several shepherds would bring their sheep in together, and they would put them in those pens. But the gate was an individual. One of the shepherds would lay across what would be where the gate would be, and they were the gate. Why? That way they would know if some sheep was trying to get out or something bad was trying to get in. And you see, they themselves acted as the gate. So when Jesus is talking to these individuals, the Pharisees and Sadducees, they know what he's referring to. He's saying, I am that gate. What does that mean? Well, you see, Jesus is the one who lays down, and he knows who comes in and who doesn't. And you see, Jesus at one point here in John, in the 14th chapter, and then after that, in the 15th chapter, he talks about how there is no greater love than he who would lay down his life for his friends. That is, he says, I'm the gate. And I am going to lay down my life when I'm going to be crucified. And I'm going to suffer the penalty and the death for your sin. And that way, I will be the gate. I will be the way. And in fact, in John 14:6, he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one can come to the Father if not through me. You can't get to the gates, through the gates of heaven without Jesus. Why? Because he's the one that is the gate. He is the actual gate. He's the one that lets you in or keeps you from entering. And here, no wonder he says, then Jesus said to them again, most assuredly I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who ever came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. And I want us to look at that next week. I want us to talk about how the sheep will know their shepherd. And Right now, as you listen to this, please don't get fooled or don't be led down the wrong path. So many people will tell you, well, there's several ways that you can get to heaven. Everybody has their own way, and we all have our opinions. We do, but don't mistake that for truth. Don't mistake that for wisdom. You see, there's only one way to enter, and Jesus called it the narrow gate. Why is it narrow? Because it's only one person, and his name is Jesus, and he is the gate, and you can only enter through him, Jesus, the gate. Study with us next week, and I want us to look at a warning that Jesus gives us here. God bless you, and we'll see you next week.